Mother of the Blue Wolf, a Mongolian epic. Fractured Empire, Book 3. Written by Starr Davies. Narrated by Blake Robertson. Dedicated to Lori, for your very early enthusiasm for Mandukhai's epic story. Chapter 2. Transitions of Power. Hami, Spring 1470. Biggerson paced with thundering steps in his meeting room as Isama entered. The sandstone walls of the palace Biggerson had claimed in Hami offered relief in the summer and protection against bitter winds in the winter. Today, a fire roared in the massive hearth of the large chamber to burn away the chill in the spring air. Servants cowered in corners, attempting to remain invisible until needed. No one wanted to face the vice-regent's wrath inadvertently. Isama's only fear of Biggerson was that the other man would discover his secret designs. Isama hated being so far from Mongol Bulag when Mandul's life hung on the balance. How could he enact his plan to seize control if he was not there to storm the gathering tent and claim or kill the queen? He needed to return before it was too late. Yet something in Biggerson's countenance concerned Isama even more. What could have worked him into such a frenzy? Biggerson's expression was as dark and ominous as a thundercloud that settled over the wide meeting room. Few places in Hami offered so much space, but Biggerson had made good use of this small palace. His wives and guards lived within this meager palace, along with his children. He had given Isama use of one wing for himself and his wives. The Hami palace was hardly grand, but it stood above the rest of the small oasis and offered views of the desert on one side and the Tian Shan Mountains on the other. The meeting room doors on the western wall opened to a striking balcony view of the mountains. But not today. Spring winds from the mountains would be too bitter to chase away even with a blazing hearth fire. In his fist, Biggerson clenched a piece of parchment that wrinkled between his fingers. The moment Isama entered, Biggerson waved the parchment fist in the air wildly. "She refuses to return my son and summons me to her at the festival?" Biggerson raged. "Me!" He spit on the floor, sneering in a rage. "Who does she think she is to command me?" Isama folded his hands patiently in front of him and kept his tone calm and even. "Whom do you speak of?" Biggerson strode toward him and thrust the parchment against Isama's chest, knocking the breath out of Isama in the process. Without a word, Biggerson resumed his pacing. Isama smoothed the parchment out over his chest, watching Biggerson curiously until he raised the parchment to read the message. His stomach sank. It had happened. Mandul Khan was dead, and Mandukhai had been named Queen Regent until a new Khan was selected at Kurultai by order of Mandul. Isama's breath caught. How long had it been since Mandul died? Weeks, at least, for the message to reach him. Perhaps months. And if they knew, Unabalad would know as well. Isama had to sweep in and seize control of Mongol Bulag before Unabalad returned, or he would lose his chance forever. It could be too late already, and I'm trapped in this forsaken place with this lunatic, he thought, bitterly. Everything he had worked for would come crashing down if he could not return to Mongol Bulag immediately. If this is Mandul's last command, we cannot ignore her summons, Isama said carefully. Perhaps he could use this as an excuse to leave immediately. Would the Oirat make their move without him? He had an agreement with Paisahan Khan, leader of the Oirat, but Paisahan often proved self-serving. Would he betray his promise to Isama to wait for Isama's signal before he attacked? If Paisahan thought it benefited him, he would likely make his own move for power. Biggerson froze with his back as stiff as a tree trunk, facing away from Isama. His broad shoulders heaved with deep breaths of anger. Then Biggerson clenched both hands into white-knuckled fists at his sides. He didn't turn to face Isama as he spoke in a low, dangerous voice. "She took my son, and now she tries to take my power? I have worked too hard to hand my power over to a woman, and I certainly will not answer to her. He shook his head, making his braided tails wave across his shoulders. No, I have a message for her, one she will not soon forget. Before Isama could ask for details, Biggerson stormed past him, barking out orders to his commander and for the guards to bring in the messenger. Isama's heart leaped into his throat. Just one act of Biggerson's rage could undo all of Isama's hard work. Ever since Biggerson killed Borogchin, he had slowly come unhinged. This last stroke could be his undoing. Isama wanted to take power from Biggerson, but not at the cost of their men. He needed them. Hustling forward, Isama rushed to Biggerson's side as two of Biggerson's personal guards dragged the messenger into the meeting room. Biggerson kicked the messenger in the back of the leg so that the young man fell to his knees. He raised his sword high over the messenger's neck. Isama panicked and snatched Biggerson's forearm before he could swing a death blow. Wait, Isama hissed. You cannot kill him. Biggerson scowled at Isama, yanking his arm free. I can, and I will. And then I will send his head back to her in response. She does not rule over me, and she cannot keep me from my son. Isama glanced at the men around them. Biggerson's anger had clearly caused some uncertainty. While the men tried to mask it, Isama had become skilled at reading faces. He edged Biggerson away from Mandukhai's messenger, as well as the other men, and lowered his voice so only Biggerson could hear him. I agree with you on both counts, but if Mandul has given her regency until Kurultai, you would declare war on her and risk your own allies turning against you with this act. Then she will use Nameku against you. It's too risky. Isama knew he had to play into what Biggerson really wanted. Nameku, the Khanship. It would be the only way to get through to Biggerson and make him see this act was a poor decision. He glanced at the men who watched the two of them. Mandukhai's messenger was pale-faced, but curious. Let her think she has won this battle, so you can defeat her at the next, Isama whispered urgently. Allow me to take men and return an answer to her summons as a show of faith, and I will be sure she knows you could not disengage completely with the Ming. Then I can also rescue your son from her clutches and bring him back where he belongs. And when the time for Kurultai comes, and it will come soon, you will be ready to seize control with a half-Borogin son in your control. At that point, you can do whatever you wish with her, personally. Slowly, Biggerson lowered his sword as he considered the proposal. All Isama could do was hope that Biggerson would see reason. Of course, by the time they reached Kurultai, it would be too late for Biggerson. Isama would be in the position of power instead. I am vice-regent still. Biggerson sounded more like an angry child than a man in control of anything. I know. I am lord of the western Mongols, and the southern tribes are in my control. Isama had spent years smuggling control of the southern Mongols away from Biggerson in secret. It was the entire reason Isama had suggested Bayan travel south 3 years ago. The Ming had disappointed him by failing to capture Bayan, and the Chakar had lost their nerve to abandon the Golden Prince as Ming Tao had promised. As usual, Isama could only trust his own men to finish anything. Instead of correcting Biggerson regarding who controlled the south, Isama nodded. And there is no longer a true descendant of Genghis, which means any man who has the overwhelming majority of support, as you do, will have no trouble claiming that title justly and lawfully. Nameku will only strengthen your claim. You are Lord of the West. Unabalad is Lord of the East, and she is the key to rule over the nation. Unabalad already has her trust, and you do not. Do this, he waved toward the messenger, and you will seal your fate. Biggerson took a few deep breaths that made his shoulders lurch. Essen had killed Borgian nobles and seized control without Kurultai. His grab for power had resulted in a vast divide among the tribes that had ended with a revolt and his death. They could not afford to repeat the mistakes of Essen's past now. Isama held his breath as he waited for Biggerson to respond. At long last, Biggerson slid his sword into his belt. Fine, but I will not give her any of my men. Send word that we honor Mandul Khan's decision and will meet her at Kurultai when the time comes in exchange for Nameku. Right now, we cannot afford to disengage with the Ming. They are in a transition of power and we need to capitalize on that weakness. Isama let out a breath of relief and grinned. He would return to Monkey Bulak. Your will, my lord. Where will you go next? Biggerson stared at the south as if he could see his destination from where he stood. We will move south with our reinforcements and push our way into the Ordos Basin and into the Gansu corridor while the Ming are weak. We will do what Genghis himself could not. And when we do, it won't matter who claims a title at Kurultai. The nation will follow me, believing I have divine right. Isama froze. We? Yes, Isama. Biggerson turned toward him slowly. His gaze clearly dared Isama to challenge him. You are worth as much as 1,000 men. I will not send you into her arms. No, this was not the plan. He needed to go. Isama had promised the Ming he would leave them alone in exchange for capturing Bayan. However, the Ming had failed to uphold their end. What came next would be their own fault. I'm honored by your faith, he said evenly. Go compose the message, Biggerson ordered. He stalked toward the messenger, nudging the kneeling man with the toe of his boot. Send it back with this spy. Isama bowed and hustled away from Biggerson, leaving the messenger in his hands and hoping Biggerson would keep a level head. Without realizing it, Mandukhai had delivered herself into the jaws of a lion. Perhaps he could not return, but he could offer Mandukhai something he knew she wanted. Biggerson's head. He would only ask for one favor in exchange. He grinned to himself as he headed toward his office to compose the message. He who controlled the Queen Regent controlled the respect of the men at Kurultai. But it would not be Biggerson who held that control. Monkey Bulak, Spring, 1470. Unabalad leaned back in his seat, the closest to the dais, and watched as Mandukhai directed men and women around the gathering tent. Watching her command the room with so much confidence only stoked the fire burning within him. He understood why they waited, but each passing day made that wait even more difficult. Had they not waited long enough already? 6 years had passed since she had first arrived in Monkey Bulak. 6 years since he had first laid eyes on her and she immediately had stolen his heart. 6 years waiting for Mandul to die so they could be together. Months had passed since they had burned Mandul's body, and still they waited. This is inevitable. Why are we still waiting? Mandukhai had whipped Monkey Bulak into a frenzy of activity. For the first time since Mandul had first set up his ger, they would abandon this area for greener pastures and the festival. Days of horse races, archery contests, wrestling, foot races, and gambling. All the tribes would come together in unity, or at least, what was Mandukhai's hope. When was the last time they had even celebrated? Unabalad could not recall a single festival since Taisun Khan's death decades ago, and Unabalad had been too young to take part. I have to ask again, Unabalad said, loud enough to draw Mandukhai's attention. Why are we not doing this in Karakoram? The land is flatter and better for races. It's too close to the Oirat, Mandukhai said with a sigh of exasperation. She had given up wearing her bokta except on strictly formal affairs and often let her hair hang down now. Unabalad enjoyed this change. It made her appear younger and freer. I have reports they are agitated, she said. Isn't the entire point of this to gather the tribes to install a new great Khan? Unabalad asked, leaning forward and resting his arms on his knees. We do that in Karakoram. Genghis did not, Mandukhai said as she sauntered toward him. He stood on the slopes of Mount Burkhan Khaldun where all the tribes could see him, and they took their oath as one. Unabalad sat back in his seat as Mandukhai kneeled in front of him. His gaze flitted around the gathering tent, but everyone appeared too busy with their own tasks to notice the two of them. Mandukhai's hands rested tenderly on his knees. He suppressed the urge to kick everyone else out and throw caution to the wind. Waiting be damned. We will ensure the strength of the next great Khan on the very same slopes, she said softly, but with a fire of certainty burning in her dark eyes. His pulse raced under that fierce gaze. And from there, we will restore the fractured empire. A smooth transition of power is necessary. Mandukhai reached up and brushed her hand over the scar across his cheekbone, as if his face were a visible reminder of that fracture. In some ways, it was. Biggerson had given him that scar. Soon enough, they would end up facing off again. He couldn't wait to kill Biggerson. Unabalad pressed his face into her touch, then captured her hand and pressed it to his lips. The skin was soft, just as he remembered it. These servants had gotten used to small signs of affection between the two of them. Touching hands, familiar emotions. No one ever said anything. Everyone in Mongol Bulang preferred Unabalad as the next great Khan anyway. They all simply waited for Mandukhai to make her announcement official. I'm tired of waiting, he said under his breath, so no one else moving around the gathering tent could hear him. Mandukhai smiled, sadly. I know, as am I. But what is a few more weeks after so many years? Torture. She smirked, then rose to her feet. Unabalad hated when she pulled away. And necessity, she said as she continued her tasks. Unabalad grumbled under his breath as he left her to work. He hated how right she was, how right she always was. Mandul had been wise to leave the management of the tribes in her capable hands. Mandukhai worked like a master potter, molding the clay into position, seeing what the lump would become when no one else could. He admired her for it. Would he be so capable in her position? As he stepped outside, Unabalad drank in the cool spring air. The chill of winter still clung to the breeze, but in a few short weeks, it would blow away and the heat of summer would be upon them. And in that summer heat, he would stand before the Khans of the tribes at Kurultai and take their oaths as the next great Khan. Then, he and Mandukhai would at last share a ger. Mongol Bulag burst at the seams with activity as families packed up their possessions on carts. In the morning, they would break down the gers and head to Mount Burkhan Khaldun. Everyone knew Unabalad would be the next great Khan, and as he moved toward his ger, those who passed nearby bowed their heads to him respectfully. Unabalad walked taller than he ever had before. His patience had been tested dozens of times over the years, but it had paid off. Mandul had made his preference known, and Mandukhai clearly favored Unabalad. Only Biggerson would stand against him, and I will crush him as soon as Kurultai is over, Unabalad thought as he reached for his door. Brother! Togachi called, jogging over from his own ger several yards away. Unabalad paused as Togachi sidestepped Esige on some urgent special mission, for Mandukhai, most likely. Outside Togachi's ger, his wife Jaghan gave instructions to a servant while she nursed their newborn daughter. 2 sons and a daughter in 4 years. Soon I will have sons of my own, Unabalad thought, and it warmed him. Where's the fire, Togochi? Unabalad asked, offering a rare smile to the Korlad lord. Hopefully in your own hearth, Togochi teased, grinning like a fool. Has she said anything yet? Unabalad shifted, his lighter mood slipping. He knew what Togochi meant. Mandukhai had not given Unabalad any sort of formal agreement to their union and her selection, and it was making some of the lords restless, despite how much she clearly favored Unabalad. If Unabalad could just get her to agree formally, it would make the transition smoother. He could not understand why she held back with half-promises. They would be together. She had said as much. He simply shook his head in answer to Togochi's question. Togochi frowned, glancing at the gathering tent, then placed a hand on Unabalad's shoulder. Well, we both know how she feels about you. I'm sure it won't be long now, with Kurultai looming closer. Has your wife heard anything? Unabalad asked, glancing past Togochi to where Jagan disappeared into their gare. Not exactly, Togochi said. Just that she knows how strongly Mandukhai feels for you. The words should have comforted Unabalad, but they had the opposite effect. This was inevitable. It had always been inevitable. So why did she hesitate? Togochi eyed his eldest son, Torador, as the toddler played with the knuckle bones. Torador did not yet know how to play the game, but the pieces seemed to fascinate him. Togochi only hoped the boy wouldn't try to eat any of the small bones. Jagan rose from the dinner table and glided to the wash basin. Only the bare essentials remained inside their gare. The rest had been packed up for tomorrow's journey. Let me help you, Togochi said, preparing to rise. I can handle it, Jagan said, waving him off. Instead of arguing with her, Togochi checked on little Babakai as the younger boy slept on a mat on the floor. It never ceased to amaze Togochi how smooth and innocent a child's face could be in sleep. When was the last time he slept so peacefully? Years, probably. Togochi was often quick with jokes around others, but he used those jokes as a mask. No good comes from showing your fear to others, his father had taught him. But his father had also been one of the lords responsible for Molon Khan's imprisonment when Togochi was just a boy. To hold a Borigin prince captive was the furthest from loyalty to Genghis Togochi could ever imagine. The Korlad had fallen on ill fates while Molon was in their possession. A famine that killed thousands, a battle that claimed even more, fires and disease. It had taken the Korlad leaders far too long to realize they had angered the high heavens by holding Molon prisoners as they had. Togochi dedicated his life to righting the wrongs the men before him had incurred. He swore to serve the Borigin heirs above all else. Now, for the first time in his young life, Togochi felt utterly lost. Without a Borigin heir to obey, he did not know what purpose he served. The best he could offer was to carry out Mandul's dying wish, to follow Mandukhai until a new great Khan was elected at Kurultai. But then what? Part of the reason Togochi had bonded himself so firmly to Unabalad had been the striking similarities in their pasts. While Togochi's tribe had imprisoned and mistreated Molon before he became Great Khan, Unabalad's tribe had held Bayan captive as well, though Bayan had not been a prisoner as Molon had been. Unabalad swore to follow the Borigin heirs as surely as Togochi had. That likeness and vow had by some unspoken agreement made the two men brothers. But Mandul was dead. Bayan was dead. The line of Genghis was dead. Breathe, Togochi, Jagan said, resting a hand on his shoulder. Togochi jumped, then drew in a deep breath as he realized he had been holding little air in his lungs. You are under too much stress, Jagan said. He patted her hand. It will get worse before it gets better. He is worried. And I don't blame him. I just don't understand. Why won't she name Unabalad if she already knows she will choose him? She is leaving the door open for any man bold enough to stake his claim. Jaghan shook her head and smiled sweetly at him. She has her reasons, but she loves him. And like you, she is also under too much stress. What reasons? Jaghan waved the question off. I will speak with her, but I am not sure what good it will do. Did his wife know something he didn't? Togochi wished she would talk to him. He had made a promise to serve and protect Mandukhai, but he couldn't do that if he didn't understand what was happening. He also knew his wife well enough to know that no amount of prying would loosen her tongue. She would keep her secret, assuming she had one in the first place. Togochi took her hand and pressed it to his lips. You are more than I deserve. She smirked. And you had better remember that until the day you die. I don't need to remember, Togochi teased back. You will remind me even in the grave. Despite his teasing, he knew he would never forget. Jaghan was one of the most remarkable women he had ever known. Delicate, yet firm. Demure, yet untamed. He adored her. Hopefully Unabalad and Mandukhai would finally find their happiness together as well. They had certainly wanted it long enough. A shadow fell across Esige's face as the gur flapped closed in front of her, plunging her into the darkness outside. Tracking down the truth about Ojerol had proven an interesting challenge, but not impossible. What she uncovered, however, had left a pit of dread in her stomach. I have to tell Mandukhai before it's too late. Esige pulled her braided hair over her shoulder and rushed across what remained of the massive camp.
If you enjoyed this sample, click the links in the description to hear more. Do you want free audiobooks, ebooks, or autographed paperbacks? Join me on Patreon at patreon.com/sZDavies_character-assassin. You'll gain access to my Discord server, behind-the-scenes updates, merch, and so much more.